Okay, so welcome to the Node.js uvwasi team meeting for March 15th, 2023. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share? Okay, if not, I do notice that we have a number of sort of new faces here. So maybe it makes sense to kind of go around and yeah, if you can do an intro and just a little bit of your interest in uvwasi side of things, I think that would be great. So maybe Pat, you can go first.
Hi, my name is Pat Hickey. I work at Fastly. I don't actually work on Node.js. I work on WASM time, and I work a bunch on the WASI standards and component model and all those kinds of things. So here to provide context and help and get your feedback and all those kind of things. Just want to be involved and know what's going on with our other implementers.
Sounds great. Andrew?
Hey, my name's Andrew. I work at Intel. I, like Pat, also work on WASM time occasionally. I've also contributed a few WASI proposals. My reason for coming today is I've been watching uvwasi for some time and I've wanted to use it and wanted to contribute. I don't know exactly how and where to do that. So I'm trying to figure that out. I do hope that I can use uvwasi for some benchmarking at some point, but I need to sort of dig into uvwasi a little bit more before I can get to that point.
Sounds great. And Tobias, I know you're active across the project, but just first time here, so I thought I'd give you a chance to introduce yourself as well.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm Tobias. I'm on the Node.js and I've worked with WebAssembly quite a bit in the past. I'm mostly here because I think Colin has done a really great job on the project so far. And still, every time I try to use WASI in any part of the ecosystem, it turns out to be a massive pain at some point. So I'm just trying to, I hope we can kind of ease that pain on the Node side at least.
Okay, that sounds great. And I think everybody else has been here, although we haven't been streaming the meeting, so maybe it's worthwhile just doing an intro for everybody as a kickoff and something we can point somebody back. So Guy, do you want to go next?
Sure, I can introduce myself briefly. I'm a longtime Node.js contributor as well, Node.js core, and worked on the module system a bunch in Node. And I'm working at Fastly on WebAssembly at the moment, and with Pat, and also looking at how JS and WASI and integrating between these environments, and I'm working on alignment and how we can get things to play nicely between these different environments. So I have been doing a bunch of work on that recently, and I'm interested to see how it can carry over into how it affects Node and things like that. So yeah, that's my interest in this group.
Thanks. Okay, Oscar.
Hey, my name is Oscar Spencer. My day job, I work at a company called Suborbital using WebAssembly extensively there. And outside of that, I'm the co-author of the Grain programming language, which is sort of where we are interested in the uvwasi project because we care about WebAssembly runtimes and making sure that they're well supported across the ecosystem. And uvwasi is a fantastic way to make sure all runtimes have support for WASI in all the best ways. So that's what we're doing here.
Okay, Blaine.
Yeah, I'm Blaine Bublitz. I am also on the Grain core team. I do a lot of the tooling stuff, and we have two use cases for uvwasi. One is directly in Node, which we hope to be using in our CLI very shortly. And the other is the WebAssembly micro runtime, WAMR, which has experimental support for uvwasi, but their non-experimental support doesn't actually work for Windows. So uvwasi is the only WASI implementation that works on Windows for them. Yeah, we care really heavily about that because we want to adopt WAMR for our native toolchain. And in terms of WebAssembly in general, day job, I work at Aztec, and I'm trying to introduce the component model to a lot of our WebAssembly output.
And I think that leaves me. I'm Michael Dawson. Like Tobias, I'm one of the technical steering committee members, contribute across the different areas of Node. A little personal interest in WASM and WebAssembly, and that, you know, at Red Hat where I work, we're looking at it and how it's used with containers and that kind of stuff. So I'm personally want to, you know, get involved to learn a little bit more, contribute to an actual implementation. As well as, you know, Node runs on all of Red Hat's platforms. So it's an already existing platform where you can run WebAssembly. So if we can make Node a really good platform to run WebAssembly, that's a good thing for us as well. Okay, so, you know, I'll dive into the issues we had on the agenda. The first one is number 187, and it's kind of the roll-up issue that we were using before we started create individual issues. So I'm just going to jump over that. I'll paste that into the link here. And so I'm just going to go through down this list, and then when we have time at the end, we can think about, you know, if there's any other topics we should discuss and so forth. So number one, we had refactor the build so that uvwasi can be used as a shared library. I know Oscar and Blaine, you were going to take a look at that. Anything we should discuss on that front?
Nothing to discuss this time. The general work that needs to be done is just like to kind of solidify how the project works as an installable library. That includes like installing headers and like making sure everything is available so that other libraries can consume it. And then there's also two kind of tangents there. One is to do I don't know what the best word for it is, but like CMake has a way to kind of tell other CMake builds how to know about the installation, and kind of another way to do it is package config. So providing both the CMake information and the package config information are kind of tangents to also making sure that this thing installs correctly. Kind of all of that thing I'm just going to bundle under one roof, but I've not actually started any of that work yet.
Okay, that sounds good. The next thing we had was stabilization. So there was a couple PRs to add at least a stub for the missing sock accept method, which have now landed. We added versioning for when we create the WASI object itself. So I think we're down now to just sort of waiting to see if we have enough momentum on the maintenance front. It's great to see we got 7 people here who are interested in participating and moving it forward. So I think that's good. And we're going to, you know, as we get closer to the Node 20 April ship date, we can make the decision to say, yeah, we've got enough momentum there to call it stable and go from there. Number 3 was implementing the force stubbed out socket method. So now that we have all the ones that were in the final version of snapshot 1, it was moving on to get them implemented. And I know, Oscar, you were going to take the first crack at figuring out what we needed to do.
Yep, that's right. And so I've done a fair amount of research on this bit here. And so there's a general plan to move forward here. Haven't made any progress on the actual code just yet. We've been super heads down on a new grain release ahead of WASM.io next week. So you'll actually start to see a lot of real progress from us after the conference next week. But beyond that, Michael, we do need to schedule some time to sit down so I can point you in the right direction on all the bits that we're going to need to get updated so we can work in parallel on that.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great. Maybe if you can open an issue in the uvwasi with like what your understanding is, and then we can get together to go through that and give us a place to record things as well. Notes.
That sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So snapshot 2, I don't know, Guy, if there's anything new to sort of discuss on that. And I guess as we go through this, I'm thinking we should actually pull out individual issues to talk about each of these to have on the agenda or not. But yeah, anything on snapshot 2 that it's worth talking about this week?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can share like briefly how the like experimenting is going with that. So there's been a little bit of work on Jco, which is a sort of a JavaScript toolchain for components that we've been exploring. And I'm just sharing the link in the chat there now. And in that project, there has been some exploration of what it would look like to implement Preview 2 in JavaScript, which I'm just sharing now. This kind of JavaScript package that represents some of the Preview 2 component bindings in JavaScript, which is obviously not how they should be done. They should be done at a native layer, but just exploring how this stuff can be worked with. So if anyone is interested in messing around, it's all very, very experimental, prototypey stuff. And so beware of bugs, etc. But at least I've been trying to start to play around some of these workflows and pull some things together, and it's possible to do some basic workflows with it. And I can start to think about, you know, how we might want to experiment with this or bring it closer to uvwasi. But yeah, that's we're sharing for now. And if anyone's interested or has any thoughts or feedback, it'd be great to hear. So.
Okay, so I'm just taking that link in the minutes as a good issue. So some work in JICO on experimenting on how implement, and sort of you're kind of saying that's the place if you wanted to get involved and sort of play around with what you've already done. That's where you'd go, right?
Yeah, to see what Preview 2 workflows might look like, and what Preview 2 APIs might look like, and as I say, this is figuring it out while it's still all changing all the time. So yeah, it's quite a process, but basic things can possibly work. Probably not, but possibly. So.
Okay. Things I'm gonna say things might possibly work. Okay, so I got that noted down. Good. Okay, so I'm going to flip back. What was that? And then finding additional people to contribute. Oscar, I know you were going to reach out to some people at the bytecode allowance. In terms of making it more discoverable, I think we've done that, and that we've got this call which is streamed. We can sort of promote that. And it's on the calendar and so forth, so that we've got places we can more easily point people to join. Oscar, I don't know if you talked to anybody else or anything you want to share on that front. Anything left to do on that one?
I have some folks who are lukewarm interested, but I'm planning to use some face-to-face time next week to do some advocacy at WASM.io, where everyone's in the same room and they can't escape me and the grander plans for WASI.
Sounds good. Okay, and so that takes us to the bottom of what we had on the list.
Can I actually make a note on that last item?
Yep.
I'm looking for issues. Do we have an issue list in uvwasi prioritized by like what people think should be worked on next?
That is a very good question. Now, Colin, who couldn't make it today, would have been the best one to answer that off the top of his head. But let's just.
I have a TLDR that I can give.
Okay,
Sure.
go for it.
Yeah, the TLDR is we want to get basically everything in Snapshot Preview 1 completely implemented, completely working. And so the only remaining thing there is the support for sockets. As it's not implemented yet, the biggest holdup there is Windows support, just because on Windows, sockets are not implemented as files, which makes everything a little bit hairy. But that's the next biggest piece is wrapping up Preview 1, and then basically it's moving on to Preview 2 and starting to get ahead of that work and getting everything that we can implemented. So I think the biggest one is first defining what world Node is going to live in and decide, okay, what bits of WASI is Node going to commit to implementing in Node Core. And so that's the very first step. Once that's done, we can then actually just start doing the work from porting over bits of Preview 1 that fit into Preview 2 and building out any of the new functionality. So we've had a little bit of discussion around what worlds Node will support, but we need to make a final decision.
I think this one as well, number 14, it's around documentation is possibly like if you're looking for a place to start, that's always good. And if the documentation's not there, you got to kind of learn what it is to be able to document it. So it's one I would pull out as interesting as well. Sorry, somebody else had something to add?
Yeah, I was going to make a comment. What's the tie-in to Node release versions? So currently Node ships with uvwasi the support that it currently has for preview 1, which doesn't include sock accept. When do you guys see sock accept being done and preview 1 shipping with which version of Node, and then similarly for preview 2?
Yeah, just to clarify, it's not just sock accept. The other socket calls are not implemented either.
Sure.
On that point, as far as timeline, I think that might be more of a Michael question.
Yeah, I think Node picks up updates and its dependencies fairly quickly. So, after we have those implemented, I did the last release to get the stubs in, so that actually, pretty easy process. I think it's going to be a stretch, but not impossible to get them implemented for Node 20. That's about a month off or maybe a few more weeks. So my guess is like Node 21 would be the place where we can get that in. Things do flow backwards though. So like, it's not like that doesn't mean that Node 20 will never have it. We flow Semver minors backwards. So yeah, I guess saying like maybe by the time Node 20 is LTS, it's not impossible. If we start making progress, start implementing, I think that's quite likely to happen. For snapshot 2, I think Guy can add that that's not even defined yet, so it's very hard to say when that might be supported or not.
I also would like to flag that not all of snapshot 2 needs to, or maybe it's not even implemented in uvwasi, and instead it's provided by Node core implementation or something. We were talking about HTTP servers and things like that, how to handle request responses on the last meeting that wasn't recorded. And that might just use the server infrastructure in Node itself and not flow back into uvwasi, or maybe like it's kind of a little unclear on what worlds will be provided by uvwasi and what won't be. So there's still a lot of that ambiguity right now for snapshot 2.
Yeah, there's quite a good fit with like what's in libuv, right? So the things that are in libuv have a nice fit with uvwasi, and so things like the file access and like that stuff probably will make sense in uvwasi. Things like APIs for AI acceleration, then I think what Blaine's saying is like that might be a different answer, right? So like all of snapshot 2, there might actually be several answers, some of that being in uvwasi, some maybe even like a native add-on could provide that AI integration. And that's part of what this team can, our goal would be to figure out what makes sense in terms of those different pieces and using, we have sort of a split interest here. One, we want to make a reusable component, which is good for Node, but hopefully also used in other projects as well, and is based on libuv. I think we can still have the same interest of saying like, but for other parts of snapshot 2, we may still want to have a reusable component, but what that exactly looks like, we're not sure yet. And then the other aspect is like, yeah, we've got the Node interest that we want to have pieces that map out like what is the story if you're using WASM with Node itself.
I think it's also absolutely reasonable to mark the WASI module in Node stable at some point, but not the actual snapshot releases. So we did that for web crypto, for example, where we marked web crypto as a whole as stable, but specific algorithms remained experimental until the relevant specifications were finished. So if we do that with snapshot 2, for example, where we say WASI is stable, but this particular snapshot is not, that might work.
Right, like the goal might be for like April to say that snapshot 1 is stable, even if we haven't implemented those methods, because something to be stable doesn't have to be complete. It just needs to be like we're not going to break people going backwards. But snapshot 2, I don't think would, definitely wouldn't be stable for some time much later.
One thing that
We would
occurs to
need.
go ahead, Blaine.
Oh, I was just going to say that if we don't want to break people, we should. I don't know if this is the case, but we should at least make sure that those functions are stubbed with like a failure, right? So that nobody can like try to inject them and then like use the thing that they wanted, but then ours that was because we didn't provide it, and now we are providing it, right? So we should make sure that even if we don't get around to implementing the socket stuff, that it's all there, but just throwing if somebody tries to use it. That was
I believe those were exactly what Michael's PRs
Okay.
did. But I
Yeah.
think we should just double check and make sure that they're returning the right code.
Yeah, they return not implemented, and it was just that somehow like
Gotcha.
in snapshot 1, they added a method without changing snapshot 1. So that was my peers just added the one extra stub that wasn't in the spec originally. So I think we're covered from that perspective.
So that discussion was like really enlightening for me. I think I get some of the additional considerations that need to be had with Node and stuff like that. My concern as a developer is like, if I switch to Node for whatever I'm doing, is the result I'm going to get the same as what I would get maybe in WASM time or WAM or wherever, right? What's the testing story with this? How do we check that when I call WASI, FT, read, whatever, I get the same thing?
That might be a question for like Pat. I don't know that we know. We have a set of tests, of course, for the implementation, but I don't know that there's like a conformance suite.
So
and if there was, that's something maybe we should be running.
It's under development, I think.
yeah, it's under development, and to be honest, I haven't gone and looked at it in a couple of months. So I can't tell you what the current state of it is. The idea of the conformance suite is you can use it to test, any runtime you like. So it's one of those things. It shouldn't possibly be true. I just haven't gone and kept up with it since late last year.
I did use it. Here's the link that I think people have been working on. I did try to use it recently. There's still things to be worked on and smoothed out. So I would say it's early days for that. But I do think the idea of having such a test suite is like really great. And I was wondering if there's any interest with integrating that with what we're doing here at uvwasi and all that stuff.
I would say like if that's something you wanted to work on in terms of getting the implementation running on opening issues to say, hey, wait a sec, this doesn't pass.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And like we could add that likely as one of the, I don't know how easy it is to run, but if it's short and not hard to run, add it as one of our actions to run as check-in, right?
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm a huge fan of that approach. What I've done in the past is when I've found discrepancies in WASI implementations, I just gone and see what WASM time did and then backported that to the other implementations. But that's probably, this seems much better.
Yeah. Well, differentially testing isn't a bad idea either, right? Like,
yeah, I was just going to say, Oscar literally generates a grain program and then runs it in a bunch of different runtimes.
Yeah.
Okay.
See if any are different.
Yeah. But yeah, like if you want to, opening an issue saying, hey, we should do this, and then sort of pushing that along, that's definitely the kind of thing that would be beneficial.
Okay, I have a few suggestions out on the WASI test suite repo that might need to get resolved first, I think, to make it easier for other people to like consume, because I didn't have the easiest time. So maybe once those are sort of resolved, then I'll like look more into this testing side.
That's definitely good.
One more point. Okay,
Yeah, no,
there's all these WASI proposals out there. There's all these worlds, potential worlds. several that I've been interested in are like WASI threads, and that seems early days in uvwasi to talk about threads, but hey, maybe we could. But WASI crypto, there's been some talk here internally about that, and I do know sort of Node already has its own set of crypto APIs, and so just throwing this out as like a brainstorming question. If someone were to add support for WASI crypto into Node, would they do it through uvwasi? Would they try to do it with the crypto APIs already existing in Node? Like how would someone do that?
So as of today, you could do either. You could go and you could implement it in just regular JavaScript using the Node APIs, and that would be perfectly fine. But I think from the interests of uvwasi is trying to be this WASI implementation for mini runtimes, our preference would be, hey, it's in uvwasi. It's able to be consumed by all these different places, because especially something like WASI crypto, like Whammer's going to want this functionality. And I mean, I don't remember all the runtimes that use uvwasi, but many runtimes are going to need this functionality. And it would be great if there's one place where they can get this. But I mean, I think a lot of prototyping in Node probably will happen in JavaScript first, just because it's going to be easier to get those out the door. It's going to be cross-platform. It's not going to have to worry about figuring things out, because we are limited a little bit in terms of what libuv gives us. I think there's cryptography stuff in libuv, but I'm not sure off the top of my head.
There's not really. So I maintain most of the Node crypto module, and one of the main issues we have, and why I believe it's likely that we might want to first experiment in JavaScript, is that many consumers of Node.js, including Electron, don't link against the same crypto library. They don't link against OpenSSL. They link against boring SSL, which has led to countless problems in the past. So if we now kind of require OpenSSL within uvwasi, for example, then Electron will again have trouble patching that. So either we have to test against different crypto libraries and link against different ones, or we have to kind of postpone that until we've kind of found a solution that works for all consumers.
Right. So yeah, because much of Node's crypto is leveraged off of OpenSSL.
Yeah, virtually all of it. And while boring SSL provides most features, it doesn't provide all features. So a lot of stuff in Node simply doesn't work in Electron. Like certain curves or so that Google doesn't value enough to put them into boring SSL. So it's really small pain points, but we should be aware of those before we commit to a specific crypto library in uvwasi.
Also, OpenSSL would be quite the dependency to add in. How complex is the WASI crypto proposed to be?
I would say it's one of the most complex ones out there right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite complex, and it's also doesn't have very much, or maybe even any, adoption. So that's partly because of its complexity. It hasn't been implemented anywhere besides wasmtime, and though it does ship as part of the wasmtime CLI, none of the wasmtime, let's say, embedders, like things like Fastly Computed Edge that's built on wasmtime, we don't enable it in production. So I think it's not something we're putting resources into right now. I know people are interested in it, and I think changing, like evolving the proposal as we move to WIT is one thing that should happen.
I'll be back in one sec. Sorry.
And it's also one of the things we might look at is like how to simplify the proposal to make it more tractable to implement, or to implement pieces of it and say, well, you don't get all of these features that it asks for, but is there a smaller set that's easier to satisfy everywhere? The set of dependencies that it needs on wasmtime, like we can't even satisfy that outside of x86. We can't even do that on ARM. So that's one of the current struggles there.
So the thing that I get concerned about, the project is called uvwasi. So just adding a bunch of crypto stuff that requires OpenSSL or boring SSL or whatever is not UV at all. Like it's not libuv at all, right? And so it's almost like that should be a almost separate thing. Like, and then you pull in uvwasi for file system access or for providing the file system world in Node, and you pull in this cryptowasi project that you then Node could use as the crypto world. I don't. It's weird. It just maybe the naming is just bad, and it just needs to become like nodewasi or something like so that it can provide all of the different worlds, like Oscar was saying. But it just seems like the naming does not line up with the goal if we start to jam like crypto and HTTP and all this stuff in there.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I
especially
think you're
large
right.
libraries like OpenSSL, like Michael sort of pointed out.
And I think a big part of that, like one, it is going to be we need to decide what worlds this project is going to support. I think that's going to be step one. But I think you're absolutely right that at this point the project has evolved. Well, I mean, at least going into preview 2, it's going to evolve quite a bit and going to need to support a variety of things that the UV name might not make sense anymore, and it might just be we can get the core bits of our implementation from here, but there's a couple other things. Or it might be the case that hey, the worlds that Node chooses to support or that uvwasi chooses to support are only the worlds that can live on libuv. And that actually seems like a very reasonable thing to do, given that, we have the choice of what worlds we want to provide, right? And so that might make sense for the project and limiting it there and saying, hey, if you need more support outside of this, you need to go, use another project or something like that. And maybe we could have additional projects that implement those other worlds or things like that. But I think there's a lot of options and maybe some decent paths forward.
I can definitely see that, like, uvwasi could be like limited to a couple worlds and then projects to cover other ones, to put together the whole story. So for example, Pat, like you mentioned, there's an implementation in Wasm time. Is that something that is reusable by other projects or runtimes, or?
It's not. It's so the host bindings are defined in for WASI crypto and WASI NN and WASI threads. They're defined in terms of WITX IDL, which is it's a predecessor to WIT. It's not compatible at all. So that's the interface is defined that way, which is the same way as preview 1. And the actual code generation for the implementation is in a library called Wiggle that is WASM time specific. It used to not be quite as WASM time specific, like it would also work with Lucet. We ended up having to drop that support for what amounted to software engineering reasons. It was a lot of burden for very little benefit, essentially. Yeah, like, I don't know whether in the long run, like we will be able, like the WASM time project will be publishing reusable host implementations just because so much of what we're doing is just using, like how do you implement this in terms of the WASM time host runtime, and it's very hard to separate out the logic that actually, like the business logic of it from all that code generation that hooks it up to the runtime right now. It's one of those, like, we're trying to solve the big software engineering project of making it happen at all, and to figure out how to factor that out is an additional extra struggle that we're kind of deferring to later. Like, we're not going to say we'll never do it, but we're not focusing on it right now because what we're doing is challenging enough.
I would say that all of those, except for WASI crypto, which is quite complex, all of the simpler WASI proposals out there, I think, have adopted WIT in their specification. But like Pat said, all the machinery for like wiring it up to the runtime, that still uses WITX. So even though the specifications are WIT compatible, the details of how that wires into the system is still the old legacy stuff that we probably don't want to share.
Yeah, we're stuck in this kind of odd point in the evolution where we're really eager for the future when everything's in WIT and everything's a lot nicer, but we're just not quite there yet. And we've been not quite there yet for going on 6 months now, which is just kind of the nature of the beast. Trying to make a really big system like this.
Yeah, I just asked in terms of like, you know, part of the interest here is we've got people using uvwasi in different places. It would be nice to collaborate on implementations versus of pieces versus reinventing the wheel for everything. But
yeah, it's hard right now to see how we would do that, and that's just because, like I said, our primary focus on getting things working at all, and then once things work at all, then finding ways to share that code. It's not impossible. It's just an additional challenge right now. So I hope we'll get there.
yeah,
soon.
and I think it sounds like snapshot 2 is a longer, you know, depends on what you call it longer term, but it's not the immediate
Right.
thing we'll focus on here anyway. So
Yeah, right now our target is to make preview 2 something that's, you know, stable in terms of, you know, not breaking under users and like something you could really build a system on. And we're trying to ship that in the fall is our current, like we don't have a very strong definition of exactly what stability means yet beyond, you know, obviously users need some amount of stability to be able to build applications that they're going to keep running. We're going to do our best there in every way we can. Yeah, we don't have a fixed date yet. We're just kind of saying the fall is our best guess.
okay. So that actually I think covered one of the topics I thought I was going to ask a little bit about, you know, based on what Andrew was asking about, was like, where are the opportunities for sharing the implementation versus, you know, implementing new things? Sounds like that we've already kind of covered that. One thing is, I think, like, you know, for the next meeting, I don't know, Guy, if you have like a good view of the different one, or maybe Pat or Andrew, a good view of the different worlds and, you know, what's in them. I know we could go read about them, but sometimes it helps to have a little bit of a, here's the ones that there are, and, you know, what's interesting or hard or easy about them from some of you who seem to be already working on them. See, Blaine has his hand up.
So one thing that I didn't want to talk about, I know we only have like 15 minutes. Before we start being like, hey, what worlds should we support? I think we need to, and this has kind of been stuck in my head since the last meeting, we need to talk about the WASI API in Node. So currently when you import WASI, you get a WASI constructor. And this is the thing that we're kind of moving to stabilize, right? And then when you instantiate it, you pass in the snapshot name. But I don't think this really works with worlds. And I'm thinking more along the lines of, I mean, I wrote this down to Oscar at some point, but it's using WebAssembly. You can use WASI, but like something like new WebAssembly with the instance, and then you like spread the worlds, and then our WASI, the node WASI module should provide the worlds that Node wants to support. And if an API is something similar to this, then a native module could export a world. Like there could be a WASI crypto native module that then somebody could install and then import that in their Node code, in their JS code, and then pass that in, or like spread that into their WASI instance. And then it's not something that Node has to like opt into supporting. Instead, they could just like add that world into their WASI instantiation. And so I think that we really need to think through the API that needs to exist for worlds before we even decide what worlds we're going to support, because I think that this is going to be a breaking change on our stabilization effort. And I'm not exactly sure. Like I said, this is just like a rough thing that's been stuck in my head.
That's a really, really good point. And I completely agree that we need to figure out, because it's all well and good planning for the future, and then but if you don't have an API path there, or if you're going to have this divergence of APIs and things. And I really like that framing of like how you spread these different worlds together and combine them to, and how you configure that and those kind of questions. And I'm definitely keen to collaborate on some ideas around that. I don't know if you want to get a document going or something between us, or maybe we can chat about something for the next meeting or the meeting after that. I might not be able to make the next meeting, but yeah, maybe we can discuss a way to kind of work through those API design problems and how we see this. If we can come up with like a rough idea of how that API might look, or like at least what it needs to support, we can then contextualize what, how these APIs are going to exist together and how that's going to all work out. And then we can then structure the project accordingly, as it were. So if that makes sense. Were there other questions along this? So you want to specify the worlds that you're specifically instantiating. Were there other implementation or API questions that were coming up while you're thinking through that, Blaine?
I think that's just generally, well, I mean, the one thing that I'm concerned about is that I think worlds need to be spread on the snapshot to preview namespace, which makes the API a little clunkier, right? Yeah, I was just trying to say, like, because Node currently has this WASI constructor, but the WASI constructor does not really encapsulate very well the world's concept, because worlds can do imports and exports, right? So like if you're providing the imports of worlds, then you might be getting extra exports as well, unless I'm confused. And I also just I think that some sort of API like this spread API or something is very good for communicating what Node is choosing for it to have as its responsibility and what it's choosing to not have its responsibility, right? I think that is the part that in my head we need to be very clear about in whatever the API design is. That like Node provides you these things and these things only. And if you need something else, you need to go and get that off of NPM or whatever, or write it yourself with JavaScript and pass that world in.
Yeah,
or with BindGen.
From an initialization perspective, I guess there is a saving in only initializing the worlds that you want to support. So having some way to configure that, and then if it's in core, you obviously want to say, how do we distinguish between what we're shipping in core and these more heavyweight things that we don't necessarily want to ship by default? And how is that distinction made at an API level? Do we, as the project, make the decision that we are going to implement these specific WASI proposals which align with libuv? Therefore, that's what we're offering. And if you want something else, there is some kind of plugin pattern that we can encourage, or thinking through those patterns. I think that's a really interesting area that we can figure out now. And that's something that specifically was what I was interested in working on in this group as well. So that was my initial interest with the API stuff. And maybe we can start discussing some API ideas. I'm happy to put together some guests and like.
Yeah, I think that, if one of you could put together like talking points or whatever it would take to like have a good conversation on that, maybe even just like, hey, here's one thing, here's how it could look like, right? Because sometimes a concrete thing helps to then poke holes and go through that. I guess the other question for us to figure out would be like, is that going to be well enough defined that we want to like, change the API that we have, or wait on that API? Or is it like, well, we understand that like whatever 2 needs is going to be different than what you did in 1 potentially, so we'll have to like add a new method or add some new methods? Or And we're not worried about that, right? In terms of saying that like we're stable for snapshot 1.
Yeah, so from an API design perspective, it's definitely good to flesh this out. But I haven't yet seen any real roadblocks from a stability down to that we have that version field now. So
Right. Okay.
that it does give us the ability to make decisions, but we should still have it figured out.
Okay. So that, yeah, I just wanted to sort of understand that part. That would kind of be my take, if we can go with what we've got, but now, you know, prioritize this group working through that. I think that would be a really interesting use of the people's time here and expertise.
Is it worth doing this work in some sort of Google Doc, or is it worth having a discussion on an issue? I mean, I know it's not specific to uvwasi, but since the main implementer that we're caring about is Node, maybe it's worth it to just have a discussion on an issue in the uvwasi repo. And then once we have a good idea of what that API would look like, we bring that back over to Node through a PR or something.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to treat, you know, the uvwasi as a group of people are interested. And so we could come up with like a proposal and then, yeah, have a PR that goes back to the Node repo that says, here's what we think makes sense, or even here's the implementation, or whatever level of confidence we have in it, right? I think having like issues, Google Docs sometimes good for easy commenting and stuff, but still having like an open issue in uvwasi that says, you know, defining the Node API or the Node wrapper API for preview 2, and maybe, you know, maybe similar. The question would be like, why not other runtimes using the similar API, right? If we can think of something that makes sense in other cases as well. So, but yeah, I guess my comment I wanted to make is like, it'd be good to open an issue. And if that issue has a link to a Google Doc, because that's easier to edit, that makes sense to me.
Sounds good.
So just Guy or Blaine, who do you think? I guess I'll see. Can I volunteer one of you two to open that issue and start the discussion?
I can take that on, sure.
Okay. Okay, we've got 5 minutes still. Any other topics that
I have one quick question. It's
Go for
mostly
it.
out of curiosity. So one of the great things of libuv is that it allows you to do a ton of stuff within a single thread and without even having to, it has a worker pool, of course, but you can keep all your application logic in a single thread. And in Node, I can run an HTTP server and an email server and a file server, all in a single thread, and libuv will take care of the asynchronous IO stuff and all that. Right now in uvwasi, we only use a fraction of what libuv does. Essentially, uvwasi always does things synchronously. Every call you make waits for the operation to finish. So in Node right now, if you use wasi, you have to spawn a separate thread for each application thread, essentially. Whereas the IO capabilities of uvwasi would allow us to do that in a single thread. And V8 recently added a feature that allows JavaScript functions or WASI implementations to return promises, and thus, essentially it allows asynchronous computation, which is very similar to the JavaScript model that Node uses everywhere else. So I'm kind of wondering if that's a non-goal, or if that might be a goal in the future to add asynchronous operations to uvwasi.
I can make a I can make a really uninformed comment. I don't think that the WASI snapshot 2 stuff is looking at async at all.
Yeah, that's
sorry,
correct.
let me clarify. So from the WASI applications point of view, from within WebAssembly, it will still look like it's synchronous. just from the embedding JavaScript runtimes point of view, it can run multiple WASI applications on the same thread because they kind of yield whenever there's an async operation. Just like in JavaScript, whenever you start an async operation and you give up control to the JavaScript runtime to do another micro task or whatever, and then the control flow resumes with your current operation once the asynchronous IO operation has finished. That's what the new V8 feature combined with libuv would technically allow us to do with WebAssembly as well. So you could run multiple WebAssembly applications within a single application thread. And from their own point of view, they would run synchronously. They wouldn't see the asynchronous intervals. I'm just wondering, it sounds like it would very well fit the Node.js model of being a runtime, but I don't know about other use cases.
And they all share one event loop is basically what we're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So they share one event loop. So the usual scalability issues might arise, but it might still be better than having to explicitly spawn separate threads.
Sounds cool to me. I have a lot to learn here, but that sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah,
I've not researched that at all, but does that break the WebAssembly sandboxing model at all? Like any sort of potential to break your sandbox and read memory from other WebAssembly instances or anything like that?
I hope not. I'm not quite sure, but I hope not. My understanding is that it really just allows the WASI implementation to do things asynchronously without the actual WebAssembly binary being aware of that.
I mean, I guess, like, is there any chance that, like, get thread local could let you leak stuff or transfer stuff from one WebAssembly module running to another if you're sharing the same thread? And is that a potential concern? I think, like, I agree 100%. It's like it's a match with the way you'd expect things to run with Node, right?
Yeah,
And
that was the idea behind it.
Yeah. And if you're using uvwasi, like not just Node, but anybody using uvwasi, you can get that, it gives you on the one hand the sort of platform independence, but it also gives you the asynchronous side of being able to, run lots of things on that same thread.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much for free. It's all already there. You just need the glue between the WASI interface and the asynchronous operations.
I wonder where that glue needs to happen, though, right? uvwasi. So this relies on V8, right? It's only a V8 WebAssembly thing right now.
Yeah, I would hope it becomes available elsewhere too, but you're right. Right now, it's only V8.
Right. So I would think until we start to see it in other places, we probably wouldn't want that in libuv itself, since it's used by like 3 or 4 or 6 other runtimes instead of just Node.js, and those ones don't. Those ones aren't V8, right? So Whammer is its own engine, and there's I think Wasm 3 uses it as well. So until those runtimes start adopting it, I don't think that that's something that we would want to do in uvwasi itself. But maybe we can still do it in some glue code, but in Node.js, since we know we have V8. That's kind of my initial reaction.
That sounds super reasonable. Yeah, you might be right that the best place for the glue code might be in Node and not uvwasi.
Yeah, and then that it'd be interesting to see how that works, because in theory, uvwasi is already doing, if it's using libuv, it's already doing the things to basically not use up the thread.
Well, right now it is. So libuv allows you to do every operation either synchronously or asynchronously, which is how Node implements like read file and read file sync. And
Right.
uvwasi currently always uses the synchronous variant, but we could use the existing features.
Okay, so we might need some support in uvwasi to say you could do either one, but then the runtime could decide whether it wanted to leverage that or not.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting question. Both the like it would be a very good fit with Node instead of having to spin up multiple threads. And then the flip side of like, what does that do in terms of isolation? Like, is WASI depending on a separate thread for some of the security guarantees would be another interesting question. So even though it's not in uvwasi itself, this, if you wanted to further discuss that, maybe experiment or whatever, I think this would be a good group to have an issue open to talk about it and think about it, that kind of thing. Because it probably would require some changes in uvwasi as well.
Yeah, I believe so. It's probably a low priority for now, but we should at least keep it on the horizon just in case we need to account for it API-wise.
Yeah. Makes sense. So we are a few minutes after. Anything else we should chat about this time, or if not, well, thanks for a good discussion. And we will see everybody in GitHub and in a couple weeks. Okay, thank you. Talk to everybody
Thank
later.
you. Bye.
Yeah, bye.